I'd like to open it up to you guys for questions. I'm sorry I've eaten into some of your time. This is the kind of issue, like a lot of issues, that can lend itself for very good reasons to speech making. I would really ask you to ask a question, and I don't mean to be rude, but I will cut you off if you don't. So make your speech in the form of a quick question. Joe.
Thank you, James. I'd like to... which
Oh.
Joe?
Oh, sorry. Both. Let's start
I got the microphone,
Joe's got the mic, sorry.
I'd like to ask each of you a quick question. One of the missionaries, Wendy, that you talk about is the principal of the public school profiled 2 months ago in the New York Times, who one of his complaints was Teach for America, that the kids, by the time you taught them how to teach anything, they were gone. And that was yet another demoralizing factor in the state of the schools and in the state of his ability to try and make it a decent school. That there wasn't any long-term commitment to teaching. And maybe it's great for the kids who were teaching, and maybe it's great, they'll make them great leaders, but was it really helping the kids? I think that's a totally legitimate question that should be addressed straight on. Diane, I'd like to ask you, whatever your skepticism is about charter schools and the statistics behind them, do you think it's appropriate for the NAACP in New York to be fighting charter schools in court and trying to keep black parents and black kids from being able to make decisions about where they send their kids to school? Thank you.
On the first, no principal needs to hire our teachers. They're not forced on any principal. Principals decide based on everything they know whether or not to hire our folks. You know, there's lots of rigorous independent research out there that shows that our teachers, even in the midst of their first 2 years, actually have a greater impact on their students' achievement than other teachers in their buildings, including experienced teachers and veteran teachers. So I am confident in knowing that kids are better off, on average, with our folks than not. I think in the long run, you know, we'd have to imagine, I mean, I think, you know, we now can look at whole communities where Teach for America has been placing a steady stream of folks for, I don't know, 10 or 20 years. And, you know, there are very different things happening in those communities today than were happening 10 years ago. And those things are happening for many reasons. There's just tremendous momentum. There, as I have been saying, are growing numbers of incredible schools. There are system-level changes, bringing those into the system. There are all sorts of powerful changes. We're changing so much about the way teachers are brought into the profession and developed, et cetera. It's happening for many reasons. But if you took all the Teach for America people, all the alums and whatnot out of the picture, you'd take away a lot of the energy and leadership that is driving the changes. So I personally, of course, believe we need Teach for America. I think it's having a positive impact for kids in schools today and will have a revolutionary impact over the long run.
Joe, I think I think that the NAACP is absolutely on the right side of the issue in New York City. There are about 30,000 minority children in charter schools. There are 750,000 minority children not in charter schools. And many of those charter schools are doing what I described before, which is skimming, excluding special ed kids, taking tiny proportions of ELL kids, kicking out special ed kids, kicking out disruptive kids. In the last round of the state testing, the charter schools got exactly the same score on the English language arts test as the regular public schools. So should the NAACP be defending the 750,000, or should they support these tremendously aggressive charter operators who are co-locating in public schools and creating a separate but equal situation, which is not, it's separate and it's unequal, because the charter kids, because they get extra funding from philanthropists, they have laptops, they have facilities, they get more time in the library, they get more time in the gym, and the kids who are in the regular public schools, who are all minority, are getting a raw deal. When there was an election last year in Harlem, which is the most charter-intensive district in New York City, the Democrats for Education Reform pumped money into that district to unseat State Senator Bill Perkins because he was critical of the charter school invasion into the regular public schools. It's co-location that was the problem there, not the fact of charter schools. And their candidate had way more money than Bill Perkins. He won with more than 70% of the vote. So the people of Harlem have spoken. They want good public schools. They don't want to keep out charter schools. But when somebody comes in and they have two billionaires on their board, they should build their own school or rent their own space. It's not that hard in Harlem. They shouldn't have to take space away from a regular public school.
That was slightly sneaky of the first, Joe. I got to ask you guys, please, one question.
Well,
just
actually,
ask your most important
I
question.
have 1.5 questions,
Okay, here we go.
actually one for each. I've known, Diane, I've known you for a long time, and I really respect you. But I got to say, I'm kind of pro-creaming, because if it means that 30,000 kids are going to get a good education, rather than not get a good education. I just want to see kids get good educations. The problem, the logical extension of what you're saying is that if you give kids computers and so on, it's not good for them because the scores don't improve. I don't believe that. So first of all, I think I'm kind of in favor of creaming. Second, for Wendy and for both of you, what's wrong with teacher turnover? I mean, as a parent of children in an affluent public school, who've been through that system, the problems aren't just teaching poor kids. All of our schools suck. And, you know, and the fact is that, you know, as a parent, I've seen 4 kinds of teachers. The genius teachers, and you hope your kid get 1 or 2 of those during a lifetime. The young and enthusiastic types whose enthusiasm often overcomes the lack of experience. The average teachers who just plod along and get through the year. And the burnouts. And the burnouts are in extreme numbers. So why can't we work the system the way the military does and make them prove every 4 years that they have the wherewithal to continue as teachers?
You know, I mean, one thing I would just say is, you know, there may be charter schools out there that cream. There are lots of schools out there, charter schools that are taking their kids by lottery, who've been proven by independent studies to take kids who are lower performing than the neighborhood schools into their buildings. There are also traditional schools that are getting results like the KIPP academies from within the system. There aren't as many of them, but there are some. What's different about these schools is not that they're charters. It's that they actually have leaders who have embraced, again, a different mission. They have a sense of purpose that drives everything. They are on an absolute mission. This is not what we do in our schools. I went to a public school like the one you're describing, Joe, and it was always in the list of the top 10 public schools in America. And, you know, its mission was to put learning opportunities in front of us. Good, committed teachers, as you say, Diane, but people were not on a mission to move us from one point to another. That's the difference. So we should be asking ourselves, how do we create more of that? It turns out that the charter law approach is actually quite an enabler, because they say, I'll tell you what, if you get results with your kids, we'll free you up over all the rules and regulations and like the micromanagement that goes on in our regular system. That's why so many more of these incredible schools are in the charter system. Anyone I know, anyone at KIPP, anywhere else, would be the first to say, the magic is not the charter law, though. That's the enabler. The magic is in the people in the puzzle who are approaching things very differently than we are in most schools.
Diane, can you address the question of teacher turnover? Why isn't it a good thing? Surely it's demoralizing for the committed, hardworking, really excellent teachers you were talking about to have to work alongside people who are just serving time.
Well, I think it's very important that there should be no bad teachers in schools. I don't know of any good teachers who want bad teachers teaching with them. They want good people. We do have a lot of churn. As I said before, 50% of the people who start teaching intending to be teachers are gone within 5 years. So there's a lot of turnover. I would just reference to you the statement that came out last summer from the NAACP, the NAC Legal Defense Fund, the Urban League, and there were altogether 6 civil rights groups. And it was a protest against Race to the Top and the Obama blueprint. And they said, we don't want churn. We want a stable, experienced teaching staff who care about our kids. We don't want closing schools. We want to have the community involved in figuring out how to make these schools better. We want early childhood education. We want resource equity, because even though there is this widespread complaint that American education spends too much, most of the new spending over the past 20 years has gone into special education. And we're not going to roll that back. So we don't have, I mean, there are certainly affluent suburban communities that are spending as much as private schools in the city, but I have yet to go into, and I've spoken to many, many educational groups, and I always say, is there anyone here who has too many resources? I've yet to have anyone hold their hand up. Do you feel like you have enough? The more, whether it was in Newark or in Missouri or in California, people say, we don't have the basic supplies if they're in inner city. How can this be? I mean, I think that we have spent more money, but we spent it on special ed, and we're spending lots of money in the affluent suburbs, but we're not overspending on schools. And let me just say, in terms of America versus the world, we have never done well on international assessments. This is a little-known fact. The first international assessment was held in the mid-1960s. We came in 12 out of 12. For the last 40 years, we have placed usually in the bottom quartile on international assessments. Soviet Union, after all, put up Sputnik, and we said in the 50s, we now look back nostalgically. I'm a historian of education. We look back with nostalgia to the 50s and say, those were the good old days. The good old days, our schools were segregated. We didn't face the tremendous turmoil and trauma of racial integration, which we have lived through and I think in some ways failed. Secondly, special ed kids were not in our public schools. 80% of them were not enrolled in a public school. Most of them got no schooling at all, particularly if they had profound disabilities. And thirdly, we had very few non-English speaking kids. So our schools have become the receptacle of crisis after crisis after crisis that are social crises that land at the school doors, and then we say those lousy teachers. It's not fair to them. And there are a lot of wonderful people who are knocking their brains out. And let me just mention, July 30th, there's going to be a march on Washington, led by national board-certified teachers, complaining about all the things that are going on across this country with the efforts to cut teachers down, cut their salaries, cut their pensions, cut their benefits, make their job less secure. These are our best teachers, not our worst teachers.
Go over here, and please.